got some incredible folks here tonight who have lived experience in both tech and accessibility and who are actively shaping the future of inclusive design. I'm going to introduce you one by one. Please come up as I introduce you and situate yourself wherever you feel comfortable, and then we'll get started. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Eliana Bravos, is a social impact entrepreneur and co-founder of ND Connect, building peer support systems for neurodivergent people to thrive with 1,000+ leaders reached through her network. Up next, we've got Angelica Chung, is a low vision AI engineer and accessibility consultant with Fable, who's using her tech skills to build tools that serve every user. Atticus Hawk is a health equity advocate, educator, and researcher whose work in harm reduction, accessibility mapping, and inclusive policy is changing how we design for real-world impact. And Tim Rose is a senior consultant of accessibility at CIBC and founder of Disability Positive Consulting. Tim is a disability rights advocate whose legal case against Air Canada led to a landmark ruling on accessible air travel. And last, but certainly not least, our amazing CEO and founder of Whimble, Emma Brown.
Before we jump into this conversation. Thank you, Nadine, and thank you everyone for joining us for this incredibly important and very long overdue conversation on access, systems, and disability justice. So yeah, in the context of the technology sector, I'm curious, how many people in this room work in the tech sector? Woo! And how many people in this room use technology? Okay, we've got the right crowd. So I'm really excited to have these amazing panelists here to have this conversation. They've got lots to tell us, and I also just want to quickly say, personally, we're a trillion people who help make this night possible, so thank you so much to our amazing team from Whimble, the volunteers who showed up, our attendants, everybody who brought this all together, so thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to kick things off just to chat through and ground us in some personal experiences. What was your first experience navigating an inaccessible system, and how did it shape your perspective on ableism in the tech sector? And we'll start with Tim because he loves public speaking.
Thanks for setting me up. My first experience happened probably when I was about 4, when I tried to play in the same way that my 2 older brothers were playing. And I realized not all toys are accessible. Now, you might think that at 4 you're too young to understand what inaccessibility is, and I probably was, but I was also lucky that I had people who helped me challenge norms, and parents who helped me challenge norms. And so yeah, I've been navigating inaccessible systems my whole life, which is what you get when you can move 2 fingers on your left hand. This is all I got. So the rest of the world, I have to adapt, I have to get creative, and I have to be flexible. But interestingly, being adaptive and being creative and being flexible, which are all things that I get because of my disability, are all words that the corporate world loves. So that's fun.
I don't know how to follow that answer. It's fantastic.
You can.
I'll try my best. Similarly to you, I think my first sort of realization of an inaccessible system does stem from childhood, and I deal with a physical genetic disability that makes movement painful. And that's very hard to articulate as about an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old. I remember my very first interaction was in a Toronto public school, looking at the enormous staircases that my classmates are running up, and I'm looking at them, and I'm looking up this giant staircase, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't also run up this giant staircase. I couldn't understand why this was less difficult for other people. That started to weigh, and in this sort of realm of shame, as I start avoiding different areas, different options, different types of educational opportunities that exist for me in these spaces that are all right for all children, why am I pulling away from them? Why am I finding myself more interested in ground floor activities because I don't want to be up this incredibly painful architectural choice of the 60s. And it was this dawning sequestration of myself. That was quite a difficult moment.
Thank you for sharing. Angelica?
To completely echo both Atticus and Tim, childhood was my first interaction, realizing that the system, the education system that's supposed to be there to help you succeed often failed me. Alternative texts were not readily available for me. Platforms such as in-text, which were available, were so slow that it was just so difficult to actually get anything done. It always just felt like my education was always a matter of playing catch-up, not actually taking the time to succeed or excel. And then after I moved to a smaller school district, I think graduating class of 53 people, any request for help made me feel like I was the problem instead of just not problem being no access to these alternative services that people like myself need. So I think that's where that lies. It's just, again, just childhood school systems that are meant to help us succeed in life.
Yeah, I think for me, even though I have navigated inaccessible systems since childhood, I think I only really realized that in adulthood. So I was like, had an anxiety diagnosis since I was younger. Even though I had some accommodations in school, like in high school, I always put a lot of pressure on myself, and I think I had a lot of internalized ableism that prevented me from wanting to use those accommodations. And because it wasn't something that many people in my life saw as like real, it was instead the onus on me was put on for me to overcome that. And then it was only in university when a lot of the structure fell apart that I was used to relying on in high school that I learned that I had ADHD. And looking back, there are a lot of like symptoms and things that were obvious, like in retrospect, and I could also see experiences with different teachers that have not been the most accommodating to me because of that, maybe interrupting, maybe being so eager and having so many questions. I remember one time a teacher was like, teachers find kids like you really annoying, and I remember crying, but I didn't really feel like that was something that was related to my own disability or the way that I show up, but instead was more just something that I had to work through as an individual. And it was only in university when I was really struggling and kind of at the bottom of like my own mental health, where I was like, whoa, okay, I do actually need some of these accommodations in university, but then I was also tasked with this incredibly difficult journey of trying to get those supports. Like I was struggling with so much, trying to figure out like what that might look like. Yeah, I think that now I'm very lucky and fortunate to have figured out so many things that help me work with my reading, stood against it, and how to accommodate myself in my life in a way that I feel like I can kind of thrive. But there was a long period of my time where I just felt like that wasn't possible for me. Just being able to
I love it. Yeah, thank you all for sharing kind of that childhood trauma on the large stage. We really appreciate it. And I just want to take a second to let everyone sit with that feeling of that these barriers have existed for people for so long. I'm going to start with you, Angelica, if that's okay. Angelica sits at a really interesting intersection because she is an engineer working on AI tools with low vision. And I'm curious how you navigate that dual role of being both the user of systems, that can be challenging, and also a builder of systems, depending on which hat you're wearing at a given time.
I would say that I am often caught in this crossroads on a daily. I do work for a startup, and so it's a constant pressure of we need to shift, but also taking into account, I don't want to have to go back in and say, oh yeah, we forgot to address this accessibility concern as an afterthought. And that has been a struggle, just having to have that pushback, making sure that we are taking, when we're developing new tools or new user flows, that it is something that is being brought up from the very start with the wireframes and getting user feedback, getting testing in. For me, it's just it's very much at the forefront to make sure that the tools that I'm producing or that I have a part in are, even if we can't hit 100%, we're hitting something. And it's going to make the user experience just a little bit better. Making sure that we can navigate our platform with keyboards, things are laid out with the proper hierarchy. Just even the small things can make a huge difference, I find.
And I think it should be said, and I don't know, I'm not saying this is your experience, Angelica, but from people I've heard from, that exhaustion of advocating for yourself personally, advocating at work, like it's a whole extra layer on top of like your job. So I think people who are in that tension, in that role, deserve to be acknowledged. And I also wanted to chat with Eliana about, like, these systems are quite ableist and inaccessible from the top down. I don't know if anyone in this room was at the Toronto Tech Week homecoming event yesterday. Was anyone there? Okay, they had some great panels. There's 1,000 people in the room, thousands of people streaming online. They had a panel discussion with the founder of Shopify, so of course it was a big buzzy event. And he was joined in a fireside chat by a big Silicon Valley venture capitalist named Schmock. He has a podcast called All In, I think. And during this conversation, I'll get to the point in a second. During this conversation with Toby, they were talking about like how to make their billions, trillions, I don't know. They were talking about how to grow their wealth even more. And he was talking about how energy and electricity and like owning the power grid or something to that effect is like the future of wealth. He made a really derogatory comment about Greta Thunberg's neurodiversity during the panel. And he said it very out loud, very clearly. And I went, ugh, and just looked around being like, oh, that was weird. And then he fucking doubled down and said it again. And I just thought, sitting there, oh my God, if this person who is hosting Trump fundraisers, who is doling out capital to tech startups, is that big of a douchebag, like how are we ever going to get rid of this mentality in the tech sector? I don't know, Eliana, if you were to say something to him to help educate him or just to address those comments in case anyone else was feeling like really weird about it, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, do you want to just share this comment that was made, just for some like additional context for people?
Yeah, so,
that might be helpful.
Yeah, sorry. So he was basically saying we can't just shut down the energy sector because some 16-year-old Swedish autistic girl says so. Oh. And he said it twice. He said it once, no one said anything, and then a few minutes later, he literally repeated that comment again. So it made me feel like this is something that this guy's like fallback little like cute tagline that he throws out to his Trump buddies. Like it was really uncomfortable, and I think if that's what's happening at the top of the power triangle in the tech sector, like how the heck are we going to get rid of this? Yeah. I'll solve that problem, Eliana.
And go.
I think first I just say, first of all, it's not just ableist, but it's also misogynistic that he called her a girl. Like, she is an adult woman, and I think that we should just take a moment and address that as well, because the barriers that we experience are not just disability related, but they're also intersectional and come from all these different identities that we hold as human beings. It's really weird that he made that comment. Like, why are you even bringing up the fact that she's autistic? Like, why is this relevant here? And to me, it just seems like he's using that to discredit the important things that she has to say. Because she's an autistic person, her opinion is not worth listening to. I know that this might seem like just like a small, like one-off remark, but this kind of thinking and rhetoric is what's fueled so much ableism for disabled people throughout history. This kind of thinking is what led to so many disabled people being institutionalized, removed from their communities, and for so long in our own histories, people being called crazy or autistic or having intellectual disability has been used as an excuse to justify their voices being shut down and also them being stripped of their rights. And so I think when these types of situations happen, it's really important to just take a minute and say, why are you saying this, right? Because it is weird. And of course, curbing autistic is important, but it's not important to this conversation, and it's definitely not important to say it in such a dismissive way that just invalidates the important things that she has to say about how energy use can impact our world. That's something we should be thinking about as we advance technologically.
Thank you for talking to that. I just wanted to bring it up in case anyone else here was at that event and was struggling with that like I was. Okay, so some people suck, and then there's some ways to actually make these big corporations recognize the bad things they're doing. So I'd like to turn to a positive, probably didn't start as a positive story, but I'd like to turn to a positive outcome that Tim encountered. For those in the room who are able-bodied, like myself, you maybe don't realize how unpleasant and sometimes downright dangerous it is for people with mobility devices to fly, to travel to conferences like this, to collaborate with colleagues in a different city, to go on vacation, to live your life. I'm sure we've all seen the smashed wheelchairs in the news recently. Like, it's a huge problem. So I'm so excited to hear about Tim's story and about your legal battle with Air Canada. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that case in case people aren't familiar with it, I'd love to hear.
Absolutely, and there's actually been developments hot off the presses as of yesterday that no one else knows.
Breaking news.
You guys will be literally the first to hear it. Back in 2016, I was invited by Progressive Insurance to come down to a corporate event they were having in Cleveland, Ohio, to talk about disability in business. Now, I didn't think this was an issue because the reason Progressive Insurance knew about me was that I had been in Cleveland the year before. I'd been asked to go down there to a pastoral care conference of all things to talk with my now ex-wife about disability and sexuality. And so as I had done the year before, I called to book the accessible seat on the plane. They said, okay, give the dimensions of your wheelchair, and you gotta go through the whole thing. And like you do with every system in this world, you have to prove your disability over and over again. And then again, talking about burnout and exhaustion, that's also where this comes in. But anyway, they eventually, it came out, they said, oh, your chair doesn't fit on the plane. I said, but I took the plane last year. It's the same airline. It's the same time of day. What do you mean my chair doesn't fit? They said, oh, we switched the planes. Great. So you switched from a non-accessible, or from an accessible route to get Cleveland to a non-accessible. Anyway, they said, sir, a wheelchair is just like a piece of oversized luggage. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And I said, I'm sorry. My legs are not luggage. Thank you. And so I hung up the phone and I went to social media and my life blew up. It got picked up by every national news outlet across the country. I did, I believe, 19 radio interviews in 4 days or something. I had to take days off work. I was in the middle of a media shitstorm. I was getting hate mail sent to me, like people were looking at my email telling me what an entitled prick, how dare I? And someone even said, what are they going to let people take giraffes on the plane next? Not quite the same thing. Anyway, fast forward 8 years, the case went to the Canadian Transportation Agency Tribunal. This was about 5 years ago, and I won. And then COVID happened, and Air Canada decided to appeal because that's what they do. Oh, and they also decided to come after me for their legal fees. So $1 billion corporation coming after me for their legal fees. Oh, and then I won again. So at the Federal Court of Appeals, I won, and the late-breaking news as of yesterday is the deadline for Air Canada to appeal up to the Supreme Court has come and gone, and they have not done it. So the case is... The last thing I'll say about it, this was never about me. It was about the fact that when I was going through it, a lot of people were saying to me, but Tim, that's just the way life is. Yeah, you can't fly on every flight. That's just the way life is. And I said, I know that's the way life is. That's why I'm trying to change it. And I think that too often in our society, we accept inaccessibility as the norm. In the tech sector, we've accepted inaccessibility as a norm for years because it's too difficult to code, it's too complex to do anything with, and so I think we need to just break the norm. Let's get some new norms because normal is a construct that was developed by statisticians in the 1920s. Like normal was never really a thing before, so why does it have to be a thing now?
Yeah.
I'll leave it there.
That's amazing. Congratulations, that's a big deadline to pass. Must be a weight off your shoulders.
It is. One again. But
we know. They apparently know. We were going again. So yeah, that kind of story of advocacy and activism takes me to Atticus. So Atticus, you've worked across public systems. You have a very interesting background that hopefully you'll touch on through libraries, public health, harm reduction, research, PhD time. You're not sick enough of school, so you're going to med school. Like, that's amazing. So curious from your perspective, from all these different experiences, what are some low-cost, actionable ways teams, colleagues, et cetera, can immediately reduce barriers during the projects?
Definitely. Thank you so much for asking that. It's almost like I had the question in advance, preloaded, and given the chance to slip it in there.
It's almost like you told me to ask that question.
Oh my God, a thrilling opportunity. Quite a lot of my time has been running around through different sectors, as you mentioned. I have too many degrees. I go through too many things. A lot of my research in my doctorate in information science got stuck on the question of accessibility for people who enter libraries and what a library actually is. I was working quite a lot with library students, and working through a Faculty of Information also trains information experts and specifically people who are going to go be the workers in libraries, be head librarians, be on top of all of these things. My sudden realization when I was working with these very bright, very intelligent, lovely students, and they were very adamant about the social goods of libraries, the accessibility. It was a word that consistently came up with very little definition, but everybody should be in the library, everybody should be welcome. And I spent a little bit of time realizing that they weren't envisioning patrons with the breadth that I really wished they had. Specifically, they were really not looking at the huge population of unhoused, poor, marginalized people who rely on that library. We are in a heat wave. That is one of the few cool spaces to exist. That is one of the few warm spaces you can go when it's freezing in this godforsaken city of coldness. It has running water, it has a washroom, and it has the touch of privacy that you deserve. As a person with a disability who's always looking for a washroom, my life is spaced out in washrooms. This city is a collection of washrooms to me. People who are poor almost certainly have an overlapping health or mental health related, physical or mental health related condition. There will be a need for privacy, for a washroom, for taking a minute. If you use substances, you need a place to inject your insulin or other things. You need the access to this world that the public library really gives you. And the vast majority of public libraries, you gotta go up some stairs, you gotta elbow open an incredibly painful door, and you've got to drag your butt through a set of shelves so tightly packed that you're gonna really get some scrapes on the hip. You're gonna samba your way through that if you're lucky. These libraries are supposed to be this beautiful bastion, and I realized we were training gobs and gobs of students as this type of degree becomes even more popular. Everybody would love to work in a library. Everybody loves books. I know everybody does. Where we're not really looking at who is your patron, who is your person, how can you get groups of people who are major beneficiaries of a system in contact with your system. And that translated over to quite a few projects that we did with a sort of a tech bent there. We utilized geographical information systems. We did quite a lot of mapping of about 30 different public libraries in Toronto. We looked at them from accessibility. We looked at them from an intersectional sort of system analysis and programs that they were offering. And one of the base things that we looked at was, I'll get to my lovely low barrier recommendations. Did it have a sharps container? And that feels sometimes polarizing. People associate sharps containers with people who use drugs, and they're using drugs in a sharps container. You know what? A lot of people inject things that they need to stay alive. It really doesn't matter what the substance is. If you are injecting something, you are exposing that needle to blood. You are exposing that blood to someone who could be poked with that needle. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't want your blood on me. That's a different activity, and I usually charge more. Being able to put a piece of medical technology safely in a place where you're not going to get poked by it, nobody's going to have to deal with it, you don't have to get the tongs, you don't have to do a from the reacher moment, and you don't have to not know it's there. This is a low barrier thing. In Ontario, you can go get a sharps container from any pharmacy. You can then bring it back. You don't have to open it. Please don't open it. Don't open that. You bring it back, they take it, they give you a new one, it's a great time. And that is an extremely low barrier way that anybody in any project, regardless of what project you're doing, but especially if you are doing it in one of these beautiful open plan, fairly accessible, nice button washroom situation, if you stick a sharps container on that wall, if you stuck it somewhere, and somebody, hopefully, who is paid, is in charge of sending that back to the pharmacy, you are going to increase immediately the comfort and the safety of not just people who work in this space, people who visit this space, and people who would like to speak in this space. So that is one of the things that I really bring forward, is the ease of a sharps container. There's another element there as well, is letting people know the dimensions of your washroom. And I don't mean you have to measure it to the centimeter. What are we working with? Where is the hook where I can put my jacket? Where can I hang my stuff? Is there enough place for me and my support worker? Is there enough space for me to care for my child when I need to be in this space? What can I do in this washroom, and what can I not do? Just let me know so I can make that choice in advance. So being able to be providing this information, if you go back to your companies, if you go back to wherever you are finding yourself doing your best work, is asking yourself, can I pee here? Can I pee here? Who can pee here? Because if they can pee there, they're likely to be there. And that is horrible. I'm so sorry. But I'm going to wrap it on that.
Whimble's new tagline.
Oh, God. You're welcome. I'll send a bill.
Amazing. And I think, too, going back to the people at the libraries who said we're accessible, didn't know what that meant, and they didn't have an accurate definition or understanding. So there's also like an awareness piece there of there are amazing consultants out there who have lived experience, who can come in, they can train your teams. So I'm curious, Angelica, to dive a little bit deeper for the tech workers in the room. We'll just do 5 seconds of what Fable is. So in your role as a tester with Fable, and then also as an AI engineer, I'm just curious, what are the most common problems you encounter in the software you're working on or you're testing? Are there some common themes?
So Fable is a organization actually based here in Toronto, I think. They were saying that they were
Maybe in this building.
And so what they do is they act as a medium, a platform that connects people like myself who use assistive technology. That could be voiceover, magnification, alternative text like Dragonfly, which is, I believe, a voice navigator. And they connect them with companies who are interested in making sure that their products are compatible with various technologies. So for myself, I largely focus on like prototype reviews or user interviews, compatibility tests, largely based with the screen magnification. I myself am a screen magnification user as well as a voiceover user when I'm feeling spicy. But so I guess there's quite a bit that a lot of websites just fall victim to. That could be things like text within images that just don't have high contrast, images without alt text. I don't know what this image says or is doing, and I am not able to either get a title or to open up the inspector and just get more context as to what that image is. Contrast within colors. Color contrasting is sometimes just really terrible. Things like a light sky blue text on a white background, you're like, I usually have to just copy that and put that somewhere else to look at it. And then something else that really gets me is keyboard navigation. This is also really big. Last month I had broken my hand, so I was very much trying to navigate my computer, not only with the voice control built into my MacBook, but also just with my keyboard and how easy it is to get lost. Keyboard navigation, sometimes there's no focus elements, things aren't navigating in order, you're skipping elements, things aren't properly labeled, and so you can't actually target them with voice activation. There's just a lot of little things that I feel will, it just opened my eye to a totally different experience that just like fuels my fire, to just make sure that there are issues out there and we need to address all of them.
Yeah, and one experience that Nikki and I had recently that I'll share, we were working with a consultant. A little plug, we have an accessible events guide out, so check it out on our website. But we were working with a consultant to develop this guide, and She interviewed a lot of people in this room to inform the guide and quoted us on the project. We said, use AI. Do not transcribe these interviews that you're doing with people, assuming that the transcription was going to be basically instantaneous. She could feed the scripts from the interviews into ChatGPT. Bing, bang, boom, we're done. She has a very mild speech impairment, and it presents as a slight pause between consonants when she's talking. And when we went back and opened up the Zoom transcriptions, it was absolute garbage. It's more examples of like where these things just aren't built for people to use. For sure.
So many people will look at something like that and be like, yeah, technology can get anyone's voice. But can it really? Because 27% of the population have disabilities, folks. That's more than 1 in 4 in this country. So if we're ignoring 1 in 4 people, we're ignoring a lot of people.
Yeah. You're missing out on a big market size if your technology is not compatible. And then I had a follow-up question for Angelica, just from, again, like that tech perspective is, obviously there's a lot of challenges, but that means there's a lot of opportunities, maybe. So where do you get most excited about what AI and or extended reality can take us to radically expand access?
There is a lot of potential, but to people with disabilities, I feel are not included when they're creating data sets, when they're creating these models. To give an example for work, I actually had to create something that was able to read transcripts. And one of the issues that we ran into was it was just not summarizing adequately. And so when I created the training data to improve our model, I had to make sure that I had broken English, combined different languages, just trying to think like how would people speak naturally, not just how would people speak in an ideal world. And doing that had improved our model performance significantly. And it's doing some weird things now, but that's a different story. I know that there are platforms out there. Be My Eyes is a great application, mobile app. They now have a Be My AI. And I had used it while traveling for a work trip. And it was just so convenient to just be able to pull out my phone and be like, oh my goodness, where in the airport am I? And it was able to tell me, oh hey, you're in front of a convenience store. Convenience store? Okay, so I'm in front of the spot where they can charge you $9 for a water bottle. That's exactly what I need. And just to also be able to create systems that, for example, with your use case with the individual who had the minor speech impairment, to create a system that would be able to train itself to adjust to your specific needs to improve its performance with your use. I think that would be a great example. Even just things like that, they seem so small and insignificant, but they make such a huge impact in, I know, my day-to-day, and I'm sure that there would be use cases that would make other people's day-to-day just a little bit more pleasant. And then same with the extended reality. We're getting into a world where we're getting more and more wearables. Meta has the glasses, and I think that was a great use case for being able to use something like spatial audio. Hey, I am walking and I just want to hear like a little chime. Like when you're driving, I know I shouldn't be driving, but when you're driving and you're trying to do the lane assist and it's like beeps, I think, when there's someone there, that'd be so cool to be able to just have. I know I'm guilty of not always using my key. I have a small child and my hands aren't always free, but if I had something like that, I'm super guilty of walking into those poles, like the stop signs, but the metal poles. And to be able to have something that feel like just like, oh wait, yeah, hey, there's something in front of you, you need to stop. And there's just so much use case out there, but the important thing here is that while we're creating these systems, we need to make sure that we are including people who would benefit, people like us, and probably many of you in the audience who would benefit from these tools, not as an afterthought, oh yeah, wait, we forgot to do this, but from the beginning, the researchers, the designers, the developers, the decision makers, because that's how we're going to get a system that actually works for the intended audience.
It's such a good point that these tools that improve lives for certain people, someone used the analogy earlier, like rising tides lift all boats, like ramps and elevators help people with mobility devices or energy fluctuations, but they also help people with strollers. And if there's a tool that can train itself on someone's speech impairment, it can train someone who's speaking a second language and has a strong accent. Like, the benefits of these things Not that it shouldn't be enough to just support the 27% of the population, but it's even bigger than that. I want to talk to Eliana about platforms. I'm curious what kinds of design decisions you've made and that you think might only be visible when neurodivergent people are leading or involved in the build.
Yeah, I think our lived experiences really predisposed us to doing something called design for the margins. So a lot of like people in like UX or traditional companies design for the majority, right? It's not like the 80-20 rule where you are doing the thing that's like easiest and fastest to do for most people. And when you design that way, a lot of people get left behind. People who are traditionally left out of many like social spaces, and I think that's been something that has really like helped our platform make a lot of different types of people feel like they are seen, valued, respected, and belong. And so I think also just like the plurality of our experiences as a team and coming from a place where we're talking about our lived experiences has made a big difference. Yeah, I have ADHD, one of my co-founders is autistic, and we really like interacting with platforms very differently. So I'm a big fan of platforms that try and support me in remembering what the tool exists and helping me build a habit of using it. Because even if something's really helpful to me, sometimes I can struggle with remembering to check in and log on and with all that kind of stuff. My co-founder does not have this issue. I hear somebody who instead often gets overwhelmed by a lot of different things going on and really prefers like a minimalist platform. A lot of traditional organizations you might say, okay, what would like most people do? But instead we try and make sure that every person has choice and that they have optionality to customize the experience in a way that works better for them and their needs. And so one practical way of this is manifesting right now is we're currently designing like 3 different sort of like themes where people can choose whether they want like a more minimalistic or whether you want to be thrown into the main community space and see people's posts or like a toggle where do you want like a minimalist kind of approach or do you want like a playful approach? We go past to think about not only how do we make this accessible, but how do we make this a space where disabled people actually want to be and like feel good and like happy and joyful. I really hope that's kind of the direction the more companies move.
Amazing. Okay, I'm a little stressed because Nadine's not going to let us leave until we eat all the charcuterie boards, so I want to give everyone a chance to get our food, and I want time for questions. But I'm going to ask 2 questions, and you can pick one that you want to answer quickly, and then we'll have lots of time for questions from the audience. Option A, choose your own adventure. If you could redesign any everyday platform or tool to make it truly accessible, what would it be and why? Option B is, what are the risks of performative accessibility in tech today? Who wants to, Tim, are you ready to dive in?
I'll dive in. So I'll take option B. So I think performative accessibility is one of those things where you've got to look at not just does something look accessible, right? I don't care if something looks. If it looks shiny and aesthetically pleasing, and it looks like it would be super accessible, that's great. Is it? Getting to the why of accessibility and explaining to developers why we're actually doing this, right? I work in a bank, and the number one thing I get in a lot of the, let's call them more capitalist parts of the bank, is no one with a disability has ever tried to use our website. Because they know they can't. Like, this is not difficult, people. It's really not. So it's that idea that asking people why people aren't using our website, that is where you get to the goal, right? So I think performative accessibility, you can skin anything to look accessible. Underneath, what is it actually?
I feel like we got a taste of, Tim's about to do a 4-week stand-up stint.
A sketch comedy.
Sketch comedy, sorry. So if anyone wants more of Tim's yelling and ranting, check that out. Atticus, do you want me to repeat the questions? Okay. If you could redesign any tool to make it truly accessible, what would it be and why? Or risks of performative accessibility in tech?
I feel like, unfortunately, I'm going to answer the same question around the risks of performative accessibility. Something that does very much hurt when I'm looking at accessible options. For example, when I'm working as a care navigator for people trying to engage with different parts of support systems, either government systems on their websites, either healthcare systems, interacting with these types of systems, is that there is quite a lot of infantilism of people with disabilities, there is not enough of an attention paid to the fact that there is an extraordinary enshrined right to information, and the access to information must be respectful of the person who receives it. They cannot. I've touched a nerve. You cannot give somebody access to their technological rights, to their information rights, without giving them a respect. They must have a respect, and that respect comes with being open and being direct and being very forward with your willingness to continue to explain, to accommodate, or provide information in alternative formats. You are working for people, and as you said, 27% of the population, that's only going to go up. This is the time to get in on a ground floor of being respectful, I think, with any kind of consumer, and really giving them that sensation or the idea or the ability to commit that you will respect their needs and their rights for information. So performative accessibility is an infantilist activity. It is talking down to people. It is saying you're not enough. It is saying I'm going to give you a little bit here because it's cute that you're here at all. That's painful. People have the right to information.
Okay, Angelica.
Is very dangerous, and to touch on Atticus' point about respect, it's also about trust. Something that I've heard a few times during our conversations up here is checking boxes, checking boxes. Eliana mentioned the WCAG. That's great and all, but that's not enough. I had a conversation with an ISP this morning, and she was talking about how it's so easy for us to just go in and just say, what's the bare minimum requirement for font size for blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's obviously not enough. There's such a wide spectrum of people that need to be accounted for. And even if it's something as simple as just allowing the user access to settings on their own that they can save within a profile. Another thing that was we love it. They purported themselves as this great accessibility, make your website accessible, easy peasy, install our widget. It was garbage. It prevented people from being able to navigate. And so here we are having performative accessibility. We'll just install this widget. I'm not sure. I stopped following their lawsuit. The last time I checked, they had a lawsuit because they were purporting themselves as this accessibility facilitator. Something, an easy plugin to allow you to become compliant. And then they don't work. And then it also becomes harder because once a company, especially a larger company, once they have that check mark, oh, website accessible, it's going to take a lot to get them to go back and change anything because in their mind, it's already done. We did this. We met bare minimums. What else do we need? Check the box. And check the box. And the box is not enough.
Yeah, there was a shitty box.
That's a different conversation.
Eliana.
I think it's just the other question. I would really want to redesign a lot of the places that we spend time on the internet, like LinkedIn or a lot of social platforms. These are really designed right now, not for the people that are actually like users of these spaces, but mostly for like advertisers. And so they're optimizing for these noisy, addictive environments. And this poses a huge challenge for a lot of neurodivergent people who are more susceptible to scrolling for very long periods of time or who have more trouble kind of self-regulating that. I think that can create more barriers and exacerbate negative impacts on people. A lot of autistic graduates, there was a study that came out a couple of years ago that autistic graduates from universities have almost non-existent social capital. And so I'd really like to think about how do we design these spaces not for just scrolling or like building a personal brand in a very performative and authentic way. So even sending a connection request, like LinkedIn used to let you give a bunch of contacts and personalize invitations, and now you have to pay to do that. So yeah, I think that we have a lot of really cool opportunities, but I hope that there is a cultural shift to supporting people's kind of digital well-being a lot more than one person.
Okay, I want to leave time for questions, so I am going to run around the room with a microphone, and if you'd like to ask a question, flag me down, yell, throw a hand up, a wheelie. Okay, next, thank you.
Hello, I love the panel, thank you all so much. This is a big question, which I hope is okay. It comes at you in two parts. Part one, what in your view is the next big project of the disability justice movement? And part two is, those of us in this room, as people who care about disability justice, over the next weeks and months, where ought we to focus our attention and energy to actually make a difference? We have all of these problems in our world. As individuals and as the Grant Collective, what do we do about them?
I would just say, I don't know if everybody's familiar with disability justice, but if you're not, that's okay. I really recommend going to SIN's Invalid's website and looking at their 10 disability justice principles. They are a great organization doing some really important movement work, and I just want to shout them out. I think that's a great place to start if you're in need of us.
I'll jump in. I think, and I'll be really quick, I think that I see the next big area as building cultures of accessibility in large corporate organizations. Because the corporate organization, like I feel more like a change maker working at CIBC than I ever did working in a decade of nonprofits. And the reason is because yes, I have more to push against, but I also have more to push with. I have a budget. And so I think building cultures of accessibility, authentic cultures of accessibility in corporate Canada has to be the next big thing. And getting chief accessibility officers into these large organizations that is looking at accessibility from top down. CIBC doesn't know this, but I have a secret deck on my computer called the Case for a CAO. And that case is basically make a CAO and make it me. And then in terms of what everyone in this room can do, my answer is really quick and really simple. Ask a very simple question. Is this accessible? It's only 3 words. Even if you don't know the answer to that, you'll force other people to think about it. And that is the starting point. The women's movement didn't get anywhere without men. The LGBT movement didn't get where it got to without some straight people finally starting to pay attention. And the same needs to happen in the disability movement. We need to get everyone asking the question, is this accessible?
I'm just going to echo what Tim said. It's very important if you are someone speaking out, I'm having an issue accessing our platform, it's going to make people think. What I see with the people that I work with, I love them, don't get me wrong, but it's oftentimes, oh, I didn't think about that. Of course you didn't. It's not an issue that you're running into on a normal basis, but then it opens that conversation, it opens up that thought where, oh yeah, actually, is this something that is compatible, especially with different tools or different organizations, because we're a B2B, so we also have a lot of government clients, so we have a different standard that we have to uphold as well. That's all. We just need allies. Anything that you can do.
Any final wise words, Atticus, before we move on to the next question?
Money. Being disabled is extraordinarily expensive. That is a number one thing. When you are poor, you cannot do certain things. You cannot access all sorts of beautiful spaces if you have to ration the amount of money you have to travel that month. If you have to prove to the government that when you were brought in as an accessibility consultant, you were paid a certain way and not too much, but a little bit. If you have to figure all that documentation out yourself, you are screwed. You're screwed. So if you're bringing in a disabled person, an expert, a chief accessibility officer of some variety, even just somebody to come and consult, do the little bit of work of offering a little bit of paperwork help to figure out how they can bill successfully to not lose their benefits. People are poor. If a disabled person has no money, they will die. So that's a very easy one.
Excellent point. Okay, next question.
This is not much a question, more of a comment. This is a great panel. I do a lot of public speaking in around Toronto, and this is the first time I've been in a room where there has been a Technicare provided, so I just wanted to shout out Whimble. It's very nice to see it. Thank you.
All right, now you're gonna send me an invoice for that shout out. Okay.
First of all, thank you all so much. I work with an organization where our demographic is primarily older folks who are figuring out retirement decisions, financial decisions. And I work in product. My focus is how do I make my product more accessible? My question is, how do we build accessibility all throughout the product development process, from initial prototyping, consulting with our clients, building our wireframes, working with dev teams, QA, acceptance testing with our clients, and we've been trying where I work to just start to create checklists to go through along the way and make sure that we're compliant, but also thinking about and building with accessibility in mind. I'm curious if there's other suggestions, recommendations for folks like myself or others in tech looking to build applications, software that is accessible, and how do we keep adding to that culture of accessibility in our organizations, whether in product development or beyond.
I love a practical advice question.
I would definitely just recommend getting real users to demo your product. It's going to give you a lot more insight than going through a checklist. No offense, checklists are great, but there's such a spectrum, again, that getting real users, you're going to find things that maybe weren't on your checklist that now you can add to your checklist. You're going to find maybe a user that you work really well with, and they're just going to be so great with giving you not only here's my pain points, but here are some options for you to consider to improve these pain points. And just building those relationships with people in the community.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But there's two things I would suggest just from a practical perspective. One is also center your questions when you are talking to community members about not just like the logistical details, but also like how they feel and what their experience is using it. So like, what can we do when you feel more seen or respected in the process? I think that's really important. And the second one is a lot of people don't want to give you negative feedback when you're talking to them. So I think it's really important to say, hey, please be super honest. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I really want to know, like, everything that we can do to actually make this a difference here, or what's not working here, because if not, then it's like a waste of everybody's time. So please be really honest, because I actually want to hear it, and I'm going to pay attention. That is something that can really help make member conversations or user reviews a lot more honest, and make people feel more comfortable saying the negative thing when they don't want to hurt your feelings about.
Okay, I'm going to get you each to ask your question, and then you guys can each choose.
Currently, within the accessibility or web accessibility space, what would you say is the future of AI and web accessibility? I know currently that there is some kind of pushback towards it, but as AI models get better and better, is the accessibility community open and more welcoming to accepting such solutions?
A really easy question on what's the future of it.
So my question is about organizing spaces, rooms that people are all in and that can be inclusive when people have competing access needs. I find it's something that comes up a lot, that somebody who has one type of access need, it can be hard for someone else, and I wonder, and it might be a good question for Whimble too, about how do we build those spaces to account for all those needs, especially in digital spaces too. I had a scenario where people were offering like visual descriptions and somebody described themselves as fat, and it was triggering for someone else, and so how to balance different people's like access needs.
I'll tackle the second one around competing access needs. I think, so I'll use a personal example. So I used to have, he's not with me anymore, but I used to have a service dog. He's now passed away, and going into spaces with a service dog where there are people of different cultures who are maybe not used to dogs being in spaces like that. I often had to have conversations around my right to be there with a dog, and I think there's no easy answer, right? There's no kind of one-size-fits-all solution, but I think both parties have to be willing to have the conversation. And as long as you're willing to have the conversation and understand each other's perspectives, that is the quickest we're going to get to bridging the gap, whatever that gap is. And so what I would say for everyone is just when we're building spaces, don't be afraid to have those difficult conversations around competing rights, and just be really open and honest and authentic in the way you approach them. That one right is not better than the other. I almost said the word Trump, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. One right is not better than the other. And so just having those conversations is an important starting point.
I can answer the question about the future of AI and accessibility. Right now, there's a huge need and demand for, just as you mentioned, for better captioning services, better transcriptions, better just assistance. That could be something like helping someone feel like they can complete their day-to-day tasks on their own. For myself, it's pretty embarrassing to have to go to a doctor and either ask the receptionist or bring someone to help me fill out the forms. But if I could have something, and it doesn't even need to be AI, like this doesn't need to be AI, but like to have AI just be there to help you create a tool that will help me be able to live my life independently and not need to rely on someone. I know Whimble is here with their personal support workers. They're great, but there's still just that sense of feeling like I still have myself.
Yeah, I'll answer the more community access needs focused question. One example that I often draw on is one of my team members was telling me about how they have a competing access need with their sister. So their sister is somebody who really likes great visual spaces and needs that to be able to see based off of their visual needs. And my team member is somebody who gets overstimulated and needs a more quiet, dimmer environment, right? And so they figured out after talking through it, my team member could go get sunglasses and wear them inside. And sure, maybe that's something that is not accessibility 101. This is how I handle that. But I think that just figuring out what can we do, is there some possibility space here that would let us work for both of us, and just being willing to experiment and just try things. I think that's a really good start. And then the second thing I'll say is coming up with really good community guidelines so that people know coming in, how to participate, how to show up, because I think that makes a big difference.
Bring us home, Atticus.
Pressure. I think my colleagues have said some incredibly useful, brilliant, and deeply practical things, and I'm really honored to be able to contribute to that. I really appreciate all of that. A colleague of mine who is much smarter than me said to me 2 hours ago that to be in community is to be inherently inconvenienced, and it is inconvenient. It's inconvenient to look at spaces that are not designed for that 27% and growing, especially interactions within those 7% and growing, and to work it out, to have that conversation and to keep pushing on it, and to not be burnt out or afraid of backlash, criticism, canceling, all these types of things that spur this inactivity of action, of just trying. And I do think that there is something to be said at a very accessibility and tech panel that we should probably stop calling things blanket accessible. We should probably stop calling them accessible. We should start saying perhaps something along the lines of, we're trying, this is the accessibility we have here, and we promise that we checked. Whimble checks very much, and I was absolutely loving going on Whimble's check of how to get in this building, how to find different things was very helpful. But being able to have that pre-information, being able to say, I don't have everything, here's what I have, if you would like something else, totally open, call me, call us, here's the number, here's my cell. So stop calling things blanket accessible, and it's very hard to get angry at you. I think that's something along the lines of, don't overpromise, just over-deliver.
Okay, I feel like this panel has over-delivered, so we're going to wrap it up there on a high note, but I want to thank our panelists so much for sharing their insights, their energy. It's exhausting to have to advocate constantly, so I really appreciate it, and I just want to advocate that when you invite people to speak from lived experience, pay them an honorarium. This is really hard work, so please take that away with you to your organizations. And Nadine physically chasing me down to take the mic back is very representative of what she has to do on a daily basis. I'll hand it over. Thanks, everyone.
Metabolizing all of that, and I'm sure you are too. Who learned something tonight that they didn't know before? Yes. So much wisdom, information, insights. Thank you for sharing. I think one of the things that I wrote down that as my very simplified synthesis is it's not innovative if it's not accessible. And I think the word innovation is thrown around so much in tech. But I think one question to ask is what's actually innovative? And take that away. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all of you, to our volunteers, to our team, to our attendants. Thank you.